Hey investors, Bradley here from Watson Estates, and thank you for joining us once again. We are the largest, fastest growing podcast for Toronto real estate, and we're happy you could join us. You guys rock, and you know me, I like to bring the best and the top guests to share experiences with you as we go. And today you're not going to want to miss this one. We have Daniel Kwak. He is actually, so he's in the States, okay? He's out in Illinois, but it is tremendous the journey that he's gone on in the last few years in developing a portfolio from 0 properties to over 80 units. So I had the opportunity today of talking with him. He has a wonderful YouTube channel, puts out great content to educate about mindset and educate as well about real estate investing tips and tricks called the Kwak Brothers. You can check that out. He also has an awesome podcast called the First Deal Experience Podcast. It was a great pleasure connecting with him today, and I think you're going to love this podcast. Enjoy. Hi, Daniel. Thank you for joining us here. How you doing?
Hey, good to be here, my friend.
I appreciate you taking time. I know you're a really busy guy running around, and I appreciate you taking the time to jump over onto our podcast to share some wisdom with our experienced investors.
Yeah, this is fun. This is really fun. This is really fun for me.
So, okay. So for people who don't know you, let's kind of introduce you. Let's introduce your family. And for anyone who's kind of wondering who is this fellow, you can find them over on the Kwak Brothers and First Deal Experience Podcast. So for our podcast listeners, they can jump over there. But I learned from kind of seeing the stuff you do that you're a PK, you're a pastor's kid.
I am, yeah.
So maybe tell me a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so my brother and I obviously were the Kwak Brothers, and like I said, if you guys want to check out our YouTube channel, it's KWAK Brothers on YouTube. We're so happy. We're actually celebrating 100,000 subscribers on Thursday, so 3 days from now. So we'll do a live event at 7 where we do a bunch of giveaways. But either way, so my brother and I, my brother Sam and my name is Daniel. We immigrated to this country at, I think I was like 5 or 6 years old, and Sam was 7 or 8. And my dad actually came to Chicago, Illinois, here in the United States, to start a church. And that was kind of like his call that he got from God. And we came, and anybody who knows the immigrant life will know that it's not very easy. We came to this country with not a whole lot. And I still remember, we lived in an apartment complex, rent was like $390 a month, I think. And we lived next to a, let's call it a gentleman's entertainment center, right? That tends to be busier when it's dark out. So we live right next to there, which was a very interesting social setting, considering my parents are like super conservative Christian, they're very deep rooted in terms of biblical roots. So it was very interesting, but either way, it was very tough upbringing. We didn't have a whole lot growing up. There were a lot of times where our family slept in the car because we couldn't afford to pay the heating bill. And so it was very interesting, but my parents gave me the gift of poverty and just learning what a dollar means, and what it means to work and that immigrant mentality, right? As they say. So fast forward to when I'm 19 years old. And of course, when you grow up poor, you learn poor, as many would speculate. So I'm 19 years old. I have negative $187.65 in my bank account. And I have a couple maxed out credit cards, and life just sucks. And I hate it. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners right now, they're raising their hands like, I've been there before, right? That's me, man. Or they might say it's me right now. So I pretty much went to the source that I know to go to when I'm in trouble, and that's God. And I got down on my knees. I prayed. I was like, hey, you got to send me something different. This isn't working. This sucks. And so he introduced a dude into my life who was my former youth pastor, and he was into real estate investing at the time. And, he kind of just came to Sam and I, and he was like, hey, have you guys ever thought about investing in real estate? And I didn't even know what that was, right? Because I was like, oh, I don't want to be a broker or a realtor. I don't want to do that. I want to do, some crazy things in my life, And so I was like, no, but, he sent us to this meeting, and of course they were trying to sell you something. And of course I ended up buying it. And then so Sam and I, we just got really deep into it. And that's kind of how we got started. That's pretty much our story growing up, and what it's, all the things that happened to lead us to where we are now.
Awesome, man. And I know from what I have seen you guys doing, you are a big influencer down south of the border, and clearly you have a ton of stuff to teach people. You're very much an education center, which is why you're reaching the numbers you are. So good job. Keep putting out the great content. And I know from what I have heard about in some of your videos, but I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit, is early on when you first started, Some people, if I were to say, you know what, this guy, he got 15 units in the first year, people's jaw would hit the floor. So when we tell them exactly how many you guys were able to accomplish, I'd love for you to share that and kind of tell us how you were able to pull that off.
Yeah, so I think in 2017, we acquired like something like 83 doors, and I was 23 at the time, and that wasn't overnight, right? So people don't know that I spent the last 3 years before that year just working my butt off. I was reading. I'd stay up till 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning learning real estate, and also my brother was right there with me. Every step of the way, we were doing it together. He was phenomenal at marketing and technology and operations, and I was very good at raising capital and just talking to people and networking. So, we made a good team. We still do today. That what they say, blood is thicker than water. So it definitely is a true statement. But yeah, that year I'd say it was a very successful year, and I appreciate the compliment in terms of saying that I've got a lot to offer. But the reality is, I'm still a young guy. I'm only 26 years old, and sure, I've been managed to accomplish some great things, and I learned some shortcuts along the way on how to do that. But I definitely got a lot to learn as well, and I still have mentors that I talk to every single day. But yeah, that year we did 83 doors in multiple different ways. We did multifamily. Biggest one I got that year was a 36 unit apartment complex that I got through bank financing, and then my first deal was a 4-unit. It was 4 single family houses that I bought through owner financing. So that's really kind of how I got these properties. And I'll kind of just go off on a tangent in terms of how I was able to do that. Because I think I was like 22 years old, and it was like the year before, I started doing a lot of deals. And I remember talking with a commercial lender, and he worked for a bank. And him and I were kind of in the same investing community that would meet weekly. And I told him, like, hey, what are the, the terms that I'd be able to get at a bank? And he started asking me questions like any other commercial lender would do. He's like, hey, what's your FICO? What's your, what's your income? And of course, at this time, this bank was doing stated income. And so they're like, what's your stated income? What's this? What's that? What's your bankability? And, he pretty much just laughed at me. He's like, dude, no bank is going to give you a loan. You're 22 years old. You have zero income, by the way. You have horrible credit. Not only that, but you have zero experience in the real estate game. Like, you are by far the biggest risk a bank is going to take on. And I was like, oh, okay. So I started asking around. They're like, well, how do I buy properties without using a bank? How can I get around that obstacle? And, instead of blaming my lack of resources, I started tapping into my resourcefulness. And, Tony Robbins says that a lot. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people can learn in terms of overcoming every obstacle. Any obstacle, shape, size does not matter. Whether you're young, old, right, black or white, or, in my case, yellow, or whatever. The resourcefulness, is always going to pay off. So I started learning about, how to buy properties. Agreement for deed is what we call them in the state of Illinois. Owner financing is another word for it. And, I linked up with a guy who had a lot of experience in owner financing. And, at that point, we just took off because we found a system, a blueprint that worked for us. I got very good at building relationships with individuals who had money, because one of the things I did very early on, and it's actually what I encourage a lot of individuals to do when they're first starting out in real estate, is get a notepad, right? Don't use your phone, get a notepad, go to Staples or just get one from Amazon. They come to you in like 2 hours nowadays, and get a pen and go around different real estate investing circles, or do it online, right? We have so many niche communities right now on the internet with Facebook and, even Bigger Pockets with my good friend Brandon, and you could literally just go around. And here's what I did. I would meet with about 500 to 600 potential, aspiring real estate entrepreneurs on a weekly basis. There was a group I met with on Monday night. There was a group I met with on Tuesday night and Thursday night. And I would ask them, every single one, this question: what are some of the biggest obstacles you have in your business right now? And that's actually how I started raising capital, because, 1 out of every 20 people would say, hey, here's my problem. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I make $600,000 a year. I work 12-hour shifts, right? 4 days a week. I don't have time to do deals. But at the same time, my CPA is emailing me every single week saying, you got to get into some real estate. You need some depreciation. You need some tax advantages, or otherwise you're going to pay $200,000 in taxes this year. What are you going to do? Right? So I said, okay, so that's your obstacle. And I would have a list of individuals that had the same obstacles. They have the money, they just don't have the time, the knowledge, the team, or the wherewithal to pull this off. And so, that's how I had these lists of investors. And then once I had the money, in terms of the relationship with these investors, and I had the owner financing, and I learned the structure through my partner that I was working with at the time. I mean, it was just a game changer for me. And that's where we just took off.
Man, that's so inspiring. And I think there's so many lessons. So the one thing you're talking about was the idea of having the seller help finance the property. So in Canada, we call it a vendor take back to try and bridge the language there, the differences. But the concept is very much the same. And kudos to you, right? Like, it's not just about having money. If you have the time, you can replace the money. And I think some people, they get caught with this idea. They think that if you don't have money, then it's impossible to do. And realistically, you've done things that no one else is willing to do. And so you are where no one else is able to get to. And so I think the hope here is that people will listen to guys like you that have really grinded. You're a hustler in the real estate world, and be able to put the resources you have. And if you don't have these resources, use ones that are out there to try and build. So very, very awesome. And I love hearing about your mindset. I love hearing about your ability to get collective financing and all these things. So if I were to ask you, as you've kind of created your real estate investing business, which has been a few years in the making now, let me ask you, how do you kind of run that operation? You got all these doors, you got everything going on, you got a team, you're putting out great content, and you're training people. So how does that all kind of run?
Yeah. So one of the things I love about my team and what we do, and even what I do, my schedule on a day-to-day basis is, I pay very close attention to what's happening in the market. And I don't just research, but I also call people and I say, hey, what are you seeing, right? You're a property manager, you manage 10,000 doors. What are you seeing in the market right now? What are some, potential dangers? One of my really good friends who I'm having breakfast with on Thursday, and I talk to him every single week, is a friend of mine named Randy. And, I did an episode with him on our YouTube channel. Well, Randy is actually the president of the Illinois Association of Bankers. So my home state of Illinois in the United States, he's the president and oversees all the banks. And he's introduced me to some great people who oversee banks in their own home state as well. And, him and I talk on a weekly basis about what's happening in the market. For a lot of the people who are listening to the podcast, and I know you have a very successful podcast as well, a lot of individuals who listen to your podcast, I'm also going to guess are also listening to other things, whether it be YouTube channel, another person's podcast, or they're, paying attention to what's happening in I don't know, do you guys have like Yahoo and CNBC in Canada?
We do. We've got CBC, I guess. We've got
CBC.
Local papers, right? Things on the local basis. We've got Bloomberg does stuff up here. So
got it. Yeah. So different news stations, but they're probably reporting a lot of similar information in terms of finances in the market. So for a lot of those individuals, a lot of the savvy ones, I think it's very, very important right now, to not necessarily be fearful, but be attentive. So again, we're paying very close attention to what's happening in the market. I actually sold my portfolio, going back to the original question you asked, in terms of how I run my operations. I sold a majority of my portfolio last year. So in 2019, I saw a very high market. I saw prices were extremely inflated. I saw apartments being paid for in literally half the cap rates that they were being sold for in 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm a man of prayer, I'm sure as you are. And I, talked with God, and I conducted with business with a lot of my mentors in terms of what I should do. And a lot of them advise the same thing. All the arrows pointed towards get out, get your liquidity, prepare for the downturn, prepare for what's going to happen. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. We're actually
pre-COVID, you were having these conversations.
Yeah, pre-COVID. So I was actually having these conversations in I'd say early 2018. Okay. And I went on an aggressive buying spree in 2017. And, I was still getting them at 4% interest, vendor buyback, as you guys would call it in Canada, and extremely good terms. And I decided to stop buying, and I waited. I did 0 deals in 2018, 19, and even this year. So for 3 years, I held out because I saw what was happening, and what was happening in the market was stupidity. If I'm going to be very honest, and as my good friend Dave Seymour would say, the economy was being propped up by Mickey Mouse money, So I mean, it was ridiculous. So a lot of my mentors said, hey, raise capital, get educated. Look for your right opportunity. The golden opportunity will come. Whenever there's a market cycle, downturns happen, there's always a golden opportunity. And so we have it now. That golden opportunity came to me about 6 months ago. And the last 6 months, we've been preparing. We've been getting the paperwork together. We've been setting up the structure. I've got I started a new fund, a real estate fund with one of my best friends, Kevin Tuttle, and my brother's in it as well, which means a lot to me. We've got 10 people on this team that we're going to be taking advantage of this golden opportunity. So on a day-to-day, I don't run a lot of operations just because I sold a lot of my buildings, all my apartments actually in 2019. But right now it's all preparation. It's preparation mode for now. But in 2 years, I'm sure that answer is going to change.
So this is really interesting because we in Canada, if you were to compare the equity growth you've experienced in the States, we in Toronto specifically, the numbers are out of this world. We never really saw a correction in 2008. And that's a cause for concern with a lot of investors up this way too. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding looking in the US is prices seem to be appreciating despite COVID. Maybe you can kind of fill us in because we know what's going on here, but I'd love to hear what's going on south of the border as well.
Yeah. So, I think for the first time in Freddie Mac and mortgage industry history, I think the rates went below 3%. Last time I checked, people were getting loans for 2.97%. Now that's very interesting, right? Because on one hand, you have a 15-year low in foreclosures when it comes to properties and real estate here in America, a 15-year low in foreclosures. And at the other hand of the spectrum, you also have the highest delinquency rate in both FHA and traditional residential mortgage financing. That number is at 8.22% for FHA. That's at 15.65%. You're talking about the highest delinquency rate in 40 years since they tracked it in the survey of 1979. And that's when they started it. So potentially in 244 years of American history, we're seeing the highest delinquency rate in residential mortgages. An economist would look at that and scratch their head. They're like, what's going on? So, obviously it points to one thing is a lot of mortgage moratoriums. You're seeing a lot of propping up of Mickey Mouse money, right, in the single family residential market. But you're also seeing a lot of danger right now in the commercial mortgage-backed securities market. Our Federal Reserve had to buy and purchase $200 million worth of commercial mortgage-backed securities to make sure it doesn't implode on itself. That's very, very scary. When you have something like COVID that's taking out so many retailers, you got Simon Property Group saying that they're only able to collect, I think that number is 72%, right? They're only collecting 72% of their tenants are even giving them something. It's ridiculous right now. So, you have all these statistics that are lining up, and yet, the market everywhere is red hot. Properties are being sold double, triple for what it's actually worth. A lot of that points to lack of inventory. A lot of that points to low rates. A lot of that points to, the moratorium stimulus. And, if you look at traditional supply and demand, it's very simple. On the demand side, you have a lot of individuals who have easy money, very accessible, easy money available. And not to mention, we're really seeing a lot of my generation, the millennials, right, who are now in their 30s, wanting to buy homes. They're wanting to buy their first home. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have a very low supply because of the moratoriums that's going on, because the foreclosures are such a low. So whenever you have such a low supply and a high demand, you're seeing a seller's market. And I don't know if we've seen this big of a seller's market in 20, maybe 15, 20 years.
Wow. Yeah. These things that you're talking about, the moratorium, right? We've got in Canada, we've got mortgage deferrals, we've got rent eviction moratoriums in Ontario. In our province here, they've recently said that that's coming to an end, and they kind of rolled it out discreetly. So we're seeing this too. We obviously here in Toronto, we have a lot of strength in our market. Our banking sector is significantly stronger, but it's interesting that some of the problems you're pointing to, government spending, overspending, they're very similar. They parallel in a lot of ways. So it's very interesting to hear from the perspective of someone in the United States. So if you were going to say, when do you think the house of cards comes down? Because clearly you're thinking there's a house of cards and it's coming down soon. What kind of time frame do you think that would look like? It's obviously difficult. You guys got the elections and stuff coming on down there. I'm just curious what your thoughts are, or are you just kind of in a standby mode?
Yeah. So right now I'm on standby mode. Obviously I can't predict what's going to happen, but if I were to pinpoint out, a particular time and frame, I really think it's going to happen sometime in second quarter of 2021. I think once a lot of these, the stimulus and the moratoriums wear off, I think we're going to see a huge spike in inventory come up. I think that's going to balance the housing market, the real estate market. But on the other end of the spectrum, once a lot of these delinquencies start catching up and a lot of these people start facing the consequences and the music stops, potentially we may see a complete 180 turn, because a lot of times what happens, and we saw it back in 2008, when the over leveraging of banks faced its consequences. And right now, by the way, we're seeing levels in terms of over leveraging that is unparalleled. We saw numbers that matched 2008 back in 2018, and the last 2 years have not been kind to us. If you're looking at a global standpoint, the world's biggest banks, going all the way from JP Morgan, Soc Gen, Deutsche, you name it. We're seeing astronomical numbers when it comes to how much they are over leveraged. And not only that, but I'm seeing research, articles, confirmation from other individuals who are very heavy in the space. I'm seeing a lot of confirmation that the capital that they're using to over leverage is artificial. It's not even real. So again, here we go again with the Mickey Mouse money. It's unreal what's happening. So I think once the financial industry, once a lot of this investment banking system faces the consequences of its over leveraging, we saw it back in 2008, how it affected people's everyday lives. We saw, what was the number? Was it $5.6 trillion were lost in 401k savings and pension funds, in liquidity, in real estate values. If that happens again, which I anticipated it will, and I think a lot of savvy investors do as well, we're going to see a huge decrease in the consumer's ability to purchase real estate. It's going to hurt FICO scores. It's going to hurt liquidity. It's going to hurt bankability. And of course, at the same time, the banks are going to tighten their underwriting process. So you've got a combination of those three things. It's not going to look, it's not going to look great. A lot of that may happen in 2021, 2022, but whenever it does, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
So it's interesting because as we're kind of thinking on a local perspective, we look back at 2008 and here in the GTA or in Toronto, we didn't experience nearly what you guys did down there. And it was a big part of it was the stability of our banking segment. We don't have foreclosures as you guys do. We use something called power of sale, where you're left given something. You don't have the home stolen from you. So it's a little bit of a different system. But it's interesting to hear this dialogue coming from the US, because there's a few things we're tracking going into Q4, and there's some stuff that we're kind of seeing buying opportunities going into the winter. But there's a lot of similar question marks. And I think the big question we have right now, if I were to say something that I'm most interested in, is this idea of evictions. And then, of course, if people aren't able to get the employment, and of course, we're printing money too. It seems everybody's printing money, and U.S. is just trying to hold the reserve currency as much as it can. But it's interesting to hear that there is so much volatility in the States, because that could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. There's a very real possibility that could trickle in an overflow here as well. So very fascinating, actually, to dive into that side. So let's take a step away from the market just for a second, because this is getting a lot. People are like, oh, they're not going to be able to sleep tonight.
Sorry.
That's okay. So let's talk from a perspective of an investor, right? So let's take more of a long-term perspective, because your whole business is built on this idea of building a portfolio and growing something and growing wealth and success. And obviously there's buying opportunities along the way. But what are some of the things in your mindset that you've learned? Maybe some words of wisdom or some things that you've kind of through your ventures, you've kind of pulled up as like things you always go back to when you look at purchasing a property or building a portfolio.
Yeah, I always think back to that first one, and to your mention, we do have a podcast called The First Deal Experience, and I have the honor and pleasure of interviewing a lot of great real estate investors. My friend Brandon Turner was on there, and I pretty much just have them share their story of how they did their first deal, and you learn the most from the first one, as they say. And the reason why I bring up my first deal is because I never realized how important it is having a team. Having a maintenance guy, having a manager, having a book. I never realized how important that is, because for me, I'm a numbers guy. I love to analyze. I love to look at the big picture. And I thought when I did the numbers on that first deal, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to cash flow. That's going to happen. And one of the things I didn't realize and made a huge mistake on is not understanding the business side of owning real estate. And that's bookkeeping. That's, having people on standby to, if something goes wrong, you're able to call them up and you're able to go there and you're able to get the problem solved. I thought just because I analyzed the numbers properly, that I was done. I was set. I could sit back, relax, get on a beach somewhere and just drink pina coladas. Right. But that obviously didn't occur, So I'd say build a team, you know, and the way you build a team, a lot of people ask me is like, hey, Daniel, how do you find a good contractor? How do you find a good attorney? And I'm sure, you know, Brad, people say that to you all the time, right? Um, I always tell you, if you want to find a good contractor, good attorney, good whatever, find first a good human being. And the way you find good people is by being a good person. And a lot of times good people attract other good people. And in my career, at least, and I've worked with a lot of great people, I've yet to have a bad experience from somebody who I would see as a good, like a genuinely good person. They do the right thing when the doors are closed and the windows are shut. I've yet to have a bad experience from having them refer somebody to me. I have never had that, a bad experience. You know, maybe I'm young, right? Maybe I need to invest 40 more years to go through that. But so far, you know, in my 8-year career, I've yet to have that happen. So, you know, that I guess would be my number one word of wisdom.
Good advice. Very good advice. Now, there is obviously way more we could cover in this podcast. I would highly encourage anyone to visit the Kwak brothers. I know it's the Kwak brothers, but I call it the Kwak brothers. It's just how I read it. I'm sure you get that all the time. And visit their YouTube channel. And there's a ton of stuff. Like, it's unbelievable, the amount of content. And I would encourage people in Canada to do the same, even though things and terms don't necessarily line up. The concept of real estate investing is universal. And I think it's a wonderful place. Of course, you need to learn your local market as well, but learning the concept of investing is important in general. So thank you again for all the content. And I appreciate you taking the time to come join us on our podcast today. Maybe you can actually share with us where, other than maybe your YouTube channel, your podcast channel, where could people get more information? I know you guys have a book and you've got other stuff going on. Where would you like people to find you?
Yeah, so I recently just wrote a book titled 0 to 75 Units in 1 Year, and it's got a lot of and what I like about it, you know, to your point, it's somebody could read it in Canada and they'll still get things out of it. You know, they maybe need to do some translation in terms of verbiage, but a lot of the social techniques in terms of how to meet investors, how to find properties, a lot of these things are very applicable in Canada. You know, I have an individual who bought it in India and South Korea, and you know, I've gotten some great feedback from people from Australia as well. I mean, it's overwhelming. It truly is humbling to me. But you know, what I love about the book is, you know, somebody said it best. They said, I read the book, and once I put it down, I genuinely felt like I had enough tools and information to go out there and do it on my own. So if they want to check that out, it's 0 to 75units.com. So the number 0, then TO, and then the number 75units.com.
Very cool. Thanks again, Daniel. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. This is a blast.
Take care.